Okay. Oops, we're recording. Okay. Well, I am Rachel Elder, one of the therapists and owner of Connected Couples Counseling. And I'm here with Dionne Miller, who is also a therapist in the practice. And we've been doing some of these kind of off the cuff recordings talking about the behind the scenes world of therapy. And today we're going to talk about being couples therapists, what that's like while also being married. And so we're going to just see where it takes us today, but we're just bringing you into the world of being couples therapists while also being in relationship and what that journey is like. So, fun fact for us is that we actually share the same anniversary wedding date, and I did the math when our anniversaries came. How many years apart was it though?
Let's see, we
Did
just
I?
celebrated 30 and you just
7.
celebrated
So
7, so
23?
23.
Yeah. So same wedding anniversary, but 23 years apart, which is just something we didn't know when our paths crossed and we began working together. But a fun little fact about us is that we celebrate our anniversary the same day every year.
We have a lot in common. It's kind of scary sometimes.
Yeah, it is kind of odd sometimes because obviously when I started to hire and look for people, I wasn't looking for someone exactly like me, but sometimes I'm like, Dionne is just me, but has had more lived life experience than
A
I've
little
had.
more gray.
Well, there apparently my husband keeps pointing out the gray, which also don't advise anybody's partners to do. But
No, no,
that's
they're
his little quirk.
sparkles. They are
Yes.
sparkles and they make you shine.
Yes. And now you can actually get sparkles put in your hair. I did that once, but my child yanked them all out of my hair after I got them done. So that didn't last very long. Okay, anyways, we're going to talk about what it's like to be a couples therapist and married. So, Dion, I'll let you start because I can get a little wordy. What is
Okay,
it like to be a couples therapist while also being married and doing couples life at the same time?
sure. So, as you know, I'm actually newer to the whole practice of being a couples therapist. My husband and I are what you call, we grew up together. We met when I was 19 and he was 22. So I wasn't majoring in psychology. That wasn't even on my radar. We were just in different paths. And so we have been through marriage together before even becoming a therapist was necessarily on my this is what I want to do when I grow up kind of radar. And so I've actually become a marriage therapist into I was in my 40s when I started this path. And so he's kind of evolved along with me. So as I was learning these things, I would kind of, ooh, let's talk about those four horsemen. I'm seeing a little criticism and being really mindful of those kinds of things. So he's just been kind of along the ride for the journey for the most part. And because we had been together for so long, well, I got to say, it would have been really helpful to have been a marriage therapist, yeah, 30 years ago. So we probably could have skipped some of the challenges that we had in our early, the first 20 years.
Yeah. What would you say are some of those challenges that you guys had to figure out or navigate or faced?
Sure. So, let's see, when we first got married, I was still in school and getting my bachelor's degree. Then we experienced having a child and moving 300 miles away from all of our support systems. Then we had another child and we've done career changes. My grandmother lived with us for approximately 10 years. So we were in the sandwich generation, taking care of her while she was, living her final years. And it was great, but there's a lot of flexing and changing that a marriage has to do when you add different life transitions, like being in the sandwich or having children, changing careers, and now we're empty nesters. So we kind of did all that before I became a therapist.
Mhm. Yeah. What would you say has been, well, I have two questions. From looking back of being married before actually becoming a couples therapist, what would you say is the one skill, tool, action that you guys consistently implemented to help build connection or communication or just navigate all these life transitions together?
We went on lots of dates.
Mhm.
We continued to be in each other's lives and be curious about each other. That never stopped. And I think that is probably the single biggest, most important thing that we could do or that any couple could do is to just to remain curious. How are you? Are you
Mm,
doing okay? How can I support you in
yeah.
this journey?
Yeah, I was just in a session, and I think being curious is such a powerful skill, but you also have to be genuinely curious, right? We can't just say,
Or,
"How are you?" checklist, but that, no, I really want to know how you're doing. I'm
right.
curious about you. I want to know you. And that
Mhm.
can get turned off over time.
Yeah, it really can. It's so easy. You get pulled apart by a million different things. And I didn't want us to be one of those couples that our kids would leave the nest and we'd be like staring at each other from across the dinner table going, who are you?
Mhm. Yeah.
What are you doing at my table? I don't know you anymore. You don't know me. We haven't had sex in 15 years. I just didn't want to be those people.
I think that highlights another piece of like the vision of sometimes our vision is what we don't want to be or what we don't want to repeat, but having something of like, what am I doing now that's connecting to my future self or my future relationship?
Right.
And so having that mission for yourself of I don't want to be that couple. I know it can happen and it does happen. And so what can I do to not become that to the best of my ability?
Hmm.
Now, since being a couples therapist, what is a tool or skill or something you've implemented that you just didn't know about or didn't realize how important it was?
Oh, so many. Okay, so first I have two really huge ones. I think being knowledgeable about the four horsemen.
Mhm.
I don't want to admit it, but I think we maybe not contempt. We were pretty good about that, but we definitely used the criticism. We used the defensiveness, and for sure we stonewalled each other. Not often, but when we would, we would do that. So that was the first one. The other thing, and this was more a me thing, was that I would try so hard to keep everything in and hold on to any chaos, any resentment I might have. And now I just let it out. I mean, I know how to kindly and gently let it out, but I don't hold on to those things.
Mm.
And it makes it diffuses, I'm going to use a word, it diffuses the bombs.
Yeah.
It diffuses the things. And so there are no more like really hard questions. Hard, not questions, hard topics.
Mhm.
Talk about all of them freely and with love and intention and making sure that we're understanding one another so that it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously, our stories are different. We've referenced that in the first one, but I went to school for undergrad in business and psychology and went straight to grad school. So I started grad school at like 23. And in that process is also how I met my husband. So I moved from Indiana to Seattle to go to grad school out here. And I had a friend who set me up on online dating, or app dating is probably the right word. It was online and an app, but kind of that phase of life. And a friend was like, "You're moving to a new city. You need to go on dates." And I was like, "I'm moving to a new city to go to school. Like, I don't know if I'm even going
But
to have time."
he wasn't wrong. Going on dates is important.
Yeah, no, they were not wrong. And I got out to Washington, I think like a month and a half because I just had to be here as soon as I possible. I didn't have anything to do other than work. So I was like, well, I'm gonna go on dates then. Like, this makes me sound terrible, but free date or free dinners, fun activities.
When you're a grad student, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I was eating. I worked at the Cheesecake Factory, and so you could get free soup and bread every shift. So I ate a lot of Cheesecake Factory bread, which some people was like, that's great, but I was living a grad school budget life. But yeah,
For
so I
those
went
of
on.
you.
Yeah, I went on a lot of dates, and my husband was one of the people who messaged, but I thought he was catfishing me. Thought his profile picture did not match his age, and so I kind of was like, "I don't know about this,"
Did
because
he
I
have a
went
beard?
on he had yes, but it was just like this weird like shadow on the image. It's his favorite picture of himself, but I was like, "I literally thought you were like a 40-year-old saying you were 24." Um, so but I kind of ignored his date requests a little bit, and I'd gone on some, like, really terrible dates, like, holy moly. I always said I was gonna write a book, but I think I blocked a lot of it out because some of them were just so bad, and also
There's a
it's kind
future there's a future podcast in that.
probably, yeah, but it's also just kinda scary to date in a new city as a female. I think it's scary for anyone, but there were just a lot of things where I was like, "Oh my, I don't know if I wanna keep at this." So, um, I went on a date with him actually the day of orientation for grad school. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, you met him at school." No, I did not. He is not a psychologist. He will joke that he is. He's in sales, so he listens to people's problems to sell them things. Um, and he was not catfishing me, so that was a huge relief. He was actually his age. And that just kind of hit it off. I wasn't quite sure about him. There was another guy that I was a little bit more interested in, but then yeah, we might have to do like dating history stories another
Yes.
time because that the last date was insane. And I thought I did think I was going to be murdered that night. I was like, oh
Oh,
my gosh, yeah,
mm,
a little scary. But so my husband ended up being the same safe person and just started the dating. So he actually went through my whole grad school journey with me, literally day of orientation until I graduated. And that was kind of how we met. But I also wasn't deeply in like couples therapy mode. It was more
mhm,
just like the basics of therapy. I didn't go to a school for couples counseling. And so it wasn't until I'd always wanted to do it a little bit, but it wasn't until a few years into marriage that I finally started doing couples counseling work more
mhm.
often and more consistently. Um, and I always tell my clients like the biggest side benefit of being a therapist, a couples therapist, is that it holds me accountable in my own marriage.
Yeah.
Which is great and also sucks sometimes
Mhm.
because it's not fun to be teaching a couple something and realizing in yourself that you're not good at that or you owe your husband an apology because
Exactly.
you did what you just taught the couple not to do.
Yeah.
But it's a huge blessing of being a couples therapist is that I want to be a good model and example. I want to talk the walk and walk the talk. And oftentimes sitting with people is that reminder of I am im I'm not imperfect or I am imperfect. What is it? I'm
Uh,
not perfect.
right.
Yeah,
You
I'm not
are perfect.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. We are imperfect and the best thing we can do is own our
Mm,
pieces in this work and try to model it and do it well outside of our sessions and we're human who have flaws and life gets overwhelming and that doesn't always present the best versions of ourselves.
right. Exactly. So what have you kind of like taken in and been like, okay, this piece of being a couples counselor would have been really valuable when we first got married.
Oh, I think the interesting thing for me with being a couples therapist and being in a relationship is that a lot of what has been helpful and what I learned is me doing more of my own work. So like the communication skills, conflict management, connection, those are all great. But something I wish I would have had in the beginning of dating is really being able to talk about how I feel or what I need without any shame, guilt, fear. I kind of was that person of like, I just need to like be making sure the other person is good and I'll sacrifice my needs or my wants because I want them to be loved and cared for. And that can produce resentment. Or for me, things would build up and then I would just have these moments of just emotional explosion. Not in
Yeah.
a bad way, but if Brad could join us, he'd be like, yeah, we would have this dynamic where it would be time to go to sleep Rachel would lose it. Rachel would hit her max, and there'd be lots of crying, lots of different topics, and
Mhm.
basically I would just exhaust myself to go to sleep. And
Yeah,
that happened way more often than I'd like to admit. But just being able to know, like, my needs are okay. It is
right.
okay for me to name that and talk about what that is, and that it's okay that I have emotions and feelings and thoughts that are different from his, and that it's important for me to talk about it. And so I really wish you would have thought while being in grad school I would be learning that, but there's so much you're learning. And I was
There's
also repeating what I knew from what I saw modeled in
right.
relationships growing up.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. I think, healing isn't linear. And I think sometimes have self realizations either on our own or with the help of a therapist. And we're like, oh, this is a part of myself I didn't even know. We
Yeah.
were going to pull out Johari's window. That's in that other category that we didn't know.
Yeah.
And then when you're ready, you learn it. And, I've learned through my many years of life that there are still things about myself I just am like, oh, aha, this makes so much sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So much. And I think it's the fun part of being a therapist is that it never stops. There's
Mhm.
something always kind of being unlocked or accessed over time, which can also be frustrating. Like, can't we just be good enough? And we are good enough, but we're meant to grow and evolve and change. Um, but yeah, I think just knowing that I can name what I need and how I feel, and that it's safe to do that.
Yeah,
Just because other times it hasn't gone well doesn't mean it can't go well a different time, or I can't, or that I can try it again and see how it goes and be better
right.
about here's what I need, here's what's going on. Or even saying, hey, can you just listen? I don't need you to fix me or solve me. I actually just need you to hear me out and understand how I'm feeling.
And that's one of my favorite things ever is
Hmm.
that little disclaimer. Hey, please just listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually the kindest, most supporting, most loving thing you can do right now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what does Brad think of your being a couples therapist?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it's probably a mixed bag. I think when it comes to the two of us, and he's like, ugh, I can't, like, you can't get away with anything. That's just the reality. Like, I'm like, I don't know why you try. Like, this is who you're married to. But I think there's some goodness in that. Like, it means he has to work to be a better person too. It's not just
Mhm.
one-sided. I think I know he's really proud, and often like he's telling the people he interacts with, like, "Oh, my wife is such a great therapist," da, 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 which is so kind and loving and feels really good.
And true.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, I think it's hard to be partnered with someone whose work is about self-development. And so I know sometimes that's one of the trickier things for us is that he would love for me to just be content. And I just don't know how to do that. Like I can be content, but
Mhm.
I'm going to continue to seek out growth and change to be an example. And it's just like in my bloodstream. I don't know how to just say, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. Even being a couples therapist, I love it. And there's that part of me that's like, and what if I did this? And what if I did this? And what about this idea? It just doesn't turn off for me.
Right.
And I think that's probably the hardest part is like, you did all this to get here. Just enjoy it, just be in it. And I do enjoy it and I am in it. And yet there's a part of me that's like, and what else? What more?
Right.
What's
You're
next?
s- you're still evolving
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're going to continue to do that for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I think my evolving is more in your face
Yeah.
than other people's evolving is more internal. And I'm a little bit more like, here's everything inside, and now it's in the external too, and this is who I am.
And is this a little shiny object stuff too?
Oh, probably. I think I'm better at like resisting that more. But like, where were we? I don't know if it was last night, but like half the time in conversation with him, I'm like, oh, that'd be a really good business idea. Like my brain is just always like, and what's next? And what ideas? And what can we do? And how does this everything just becomes something that I could put my hands in? And he's like, can we just not have our hands in so many things? But that's also one of our dynamics. We're
Yeah.
both like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm a little bit more, I jump a little bit more, and he's a little bit, I got my hands in a lot of things, but I'm consistent in what I have my hands in. And I'm like, let's throw this dart and see how it lands. And if it doesn't land, we'll throw the next one and we'll just keep trying.
Right. Something will stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know one thing that he will say that he likes a lot is that a lot of times when I'm like, oh, it was a hard day, like the concepts, the theories. He's like, let's not become that. Let's work on this. And he's really open to
Mhm.
that. We went through a phase where I was really unhappy and started to imagine, is the grass greener on the other side? Would
Mhm.
I be happier with someone else? Which was terrifying to be in that place as a couples therapist. But to come to him and just be like, I'm really struggling and I think we need help. And he was like, absolutely, like, let's go right now. Who are we going to call? Who are we going to meet with? It was still vulnerable and hard, but
Yeah.
he is more open to therapy for at least couples. He's a little resistant to individual therapy, but he'll
I
get
get
there someday.
it.
What about for Bill? Which is also funny that our husbands are both B names.
I know.
We really have too much in common.
So Bill will tell you, because I asked him this one in kind of thinking about this whole concept. I was like, what is your favorite thing? And he totally, he's like, we have learned a lot of skills. Our marriage is probably better than it's ever been.
Mm,
And we have had consistently a really good, strong marriage. We've had seasons, but overall, it's been a really good, solid marriage.
yeah,
But I mean, it's truly better than it's ever been. We check in every single day and we're consistent. And when we do have conflict, and it's pretty rare, but we do have conflict, it's very, 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 I mean, it's like grown up, which is just wow, grown up. So that's really good, really healthy conflict. But he'll also tell me more than once, please don't therapize me.
yeah,
And it's so hard to turn it off.
yeah,
When you see 4 or 5 clients every day, and that's where you're living in that space, and especially as a newer therapist, I dream about things I should do in practice. It consumes me. It's a lot of who I am right now is wearing that therapist hat. So it's really hard to go, nope, I'm just me today.
yeah.
I am 100% me. I'm not, but I see this in you.
Well, I think you're naming something that kind of happens when you are passionate about your work is that it does become you. So I'm not going out in the world and analyzing everything, but how my brain works is that it's just filtering through relationship dynamics and how to be engaged and how to be present or how am I not showing up. And so, yes, our partners are like, don't therapize us, but at some point it is just who we are. And so it gets a little
It is.
confusing. And we have the choice to like turn up the speed of it or the energy of it, I guess would be a
Right.
better word, right? I could be full on therapy lingo, or I
Yeah.
could turn that dial down and just be Rachel lingo more often, even though that relationship filter is still there.
Right, right. So I'm really cautious. I don't say, so Bill, where do you feel that in your body? What color is it? What does it look like? Does it have a taste?
Imagine. Can you imagine if we talk to our partners like that? We can, but it's just so. I always tell my clients, I'm like, I don't know how to turn off my therapist language here, but I can tell you for certain I do not talk to my husband like that. So take what I'm saying and modify it in your language. But I don't go, yeah, how does that feel in your body to my husband? I'm more like, what's going on with you?
Right.
But I don't know how to do that in session. I'm like, this is therapist language, lingo is on. There's no turning it off. Make
Yeah.
this more non-therapeutic, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, one question we had with this idea of like, what's it like to be married and as couples therapists was to explore how have marriages changed from our perspectives. And so, fun part with this is that you have been married for, you said 30? Yeah, 30 years, which is huge. And we were just talking before we got on here about video dating. And so just even how like dating has changed, but from your perspective, from how marriages were when you were growing up as a kid to the beginning of getting married in your world to now, how do you believe marriages have changed?
Oh, so much. So my parents were kind of hippies. They were hippies. And they had a very, they didn't have a ethically monogamous relationship. They had a non-ethically non-monogamous relationship. So I watched them and then I watched my grandparents. So my parents' marriage was a hot mess. And I watched my grandparents who had a very, very traditional 1950s, very strong gender roles marriage. And so those were my two kind of primary, like, oh, so that's what marriage is supposed to be like. And my husband grew up in a marriage or grew up with parents who were still married, which was a miracle. Um, and they had a fairly traditional marriage. And we got married, and it was like, oh, how do we do these gender roles? And thankfully, my husband is not super traditional. So it was like, oh, I'll take care of the dishes, but it wasn't like you're the woman, you cook, clean, etc. It was, this is how it works with our family. And so in that respect, I think that sort starting to change of gender roles has been really big, a little bit more sharing the mental load as well.
Mhm.
And that's been kind of a change, not as much as what I see in more recent couples where, you have more people living together and not necessarily getting married. You have a greater acceptance of more open or polyamorous relationships where it was a little more quiet when I
Mhm.
was younger.
Yeah.
Um, let's see what else. Uh, yeah, I think it's kind of what I've seen as far as transitions. I'm sure I'll have more as you share as well.
Well, it's funny. I'm sitting here thinking of like, how have I seen marriages change? And there's this like weird part of me that I'm like, I'm too young to answer. Like, I'm too new to marriage to really answer that, which I know is not true. But I think there's something in my brain that's like, I don't know how to answer that, even though I wrote the question. But I'm like, I can see how dating has changed. But for some reason, answering how has marriage changed feels harder for me to answer. And I don't know if it's because it gets more like vulnerable and going to like what was modeled by my parents and their parents. What I know consistently comes up is that I think divorce is just more common, and divorce,
Yeah.
it feels like it's an easier way out. And I'm like hesitant to say that because this is more opinion versus like evidence based. I mean, there's some evidence that shows that the statistic is rising. But I think if I think about like my parents' generation or even like the generation I was born in, divorces were happening, but I feel like they've rocketed
Yeah.
more. I feel like people working through things, and maybe that's because people recognize that they don't have to stay in these relationships, so there could be goodness behind it too. But I do wonder if people are working through things more often than not. I don't know if I said
That
that
they
right.
were working through things more
Or
often than,
they're choosing not to work through things more.
yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I know when I was in third grade, I was the only person in my class whose parents were separated and on the way to get divorced.
Mhm.
Um, and it was such a blessing that my parents got divorced. They should never have gotten married in the first place. Uh, but so I think there's that, but I also think there was more of it was less socially acceptable, less culturally acceptable And there was a lot of put up and shut up. Don't, you just keep those resentments. Those aren't okay to have. You your spouse will cheat on you, you will suck it up because that's what men do. And I think I think in a lot of ways we've gotten to the point where we're like, it's in some couples it is absolutely okay to do those things, and in some couples it's not.
Mhm.
And so with women being more active, not active, more having more career opportunities, we're able to be like, no, this is not acceptable for me.
Yeah.
I need more.
Yeah. I think if marriage, things that have changed in marriages, people are allowed to have boundaries in their marriage now. People
Yes.
are are talking about what those boundaries are and what those needs are more than they were, and that they're allowed to be present, which I think is
Mhm.
still something in my work with couples that sometimes it's like, wait, I get to have boundaries? Yes, you absolutely do. It's
100%.
not a bad thing. It's actually good, and it can be for a period of time, it can be permanent, but it's about you focusing on this is what I need to be healthy in this relationship. Can you join me in that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I also recognize like I'm in a place where I went through that phase of everyone around us where it's getting engaged and getting married. We kind of are still, but somewhat out of that stage of everyone having babies.
Mhm.
And I think there's something that like I'm anticipating or also worried about like the next 10 years. Who in our life and our community is still going to be connected and who's not. And I feel like I'm venturing into that world of like
Mhm.
life has happened and transitions have happened. And now how is that going to play out for every relationship? And like
Yeah.
for personally, it helps me stay really accountable. Like I don't want to be 10 years from now not with Brad. And I don't think any of us set out for that. And I feel like I'm entering into that stage of marriage in my community where that becomes more present for people of the divide and the disconnect and
Mhm.
less communication, less ability to navigate stressors and hardships.
Yeah.
That makes
It,
me
as
really
we
sad.
Yeah, we know that children, what is 70% of all couples when they start family, they struggle with marital dissatisfaction for at least 3 years.
Yeah,
And so any opportunity to like reconnect and go, whoa, whoa, I'm holding on to this.
yeah.
And the other thing you brought up was like marriage seasons, the 7 year cycles. And I don't know how much truth there is to cycles like that, if it's 7 years.
Mhm.
But I do see, I mean, I have friends, they made it maybe 7 years, maybe 14 years. And now my friends that are like in the 20s, they're starting to get divorced. I've got some friends now that are doing gray divorces and gray marriages.
What is it? Gray divorces and gray marriages?
Yeah, so in gray divorces, it's people that are kind of, 50s and 60s, and they're like, we've raised our kids,
Mm,
we're done.
huh. I've never
Yeah.
heard that
Yeah.
phrasing. Yeah,
So, and I yeah,
yeah.
it's sometimes if there's so many opportunities to connect, and every day there's a new opportunity to do that all over again.
Mhm.
And if you don't grab it, it can slowly drift you apart
Yeah,
till you're both withdrawn from the relationship.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing we teach couples a lot is that keeping a marriage alive and connected is a lot of effort and work. It doesn't have to always feel like hard effort and work. And sometimes it has those seasons or periods of time where it does. And when that happens, you don't stop. I mean, you can make that choice, but be mindful of the impact of stopping or not giving it the energy you can give that day. And we're
Yeah,
not always saying 100% effort, but
yeah,
being realistic of I've got 20% to give and that's what I can give today.
exactly.
but you never reach the peak of the mountain and the work is done. You
No,
reach that peak
no,
and then you have another peak to climb.
100%. And someday, I mean, I think if you do the hard from the get-go, it makes it so that it's not so hard. I mean, we still have more seasons ahead of us.
Yeah.
As we age, life changes. There's that whole in sickness and in health. And
Mhm.
we've been blessed with a whole lot of health, but who knows what's in store for us going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. With where you guys are at, what is your vision or your hopes or kind of goals that you have for your relationship?
So Bill hopes to retire someday. I don't plan on retiring anytime soon. I love what I do. So even if it's like scaling it back at some point, he'd love to retire. So I'd love to have grandkids.
Mhm.
Low key, I don't want to hint too hard on either of my children, but
Don't listen.
don't listen. So, but they are adults.
Yeah.
So, um, so there's those seasons. Who are we gonna be if well, he works from home, but like if he's home all the time and doesn't have things to do, I know a lot of couples that
Yeah.
is retirement is tough
Yeah.
on marriages. And then of course maybe grandkids. Right now I've got great nieces and nephews. They sort of fulfill some of that. They're wonderful little munchkins. Um, what else? We want to travel more. We want to do more. We really, well, I really enjoy home improvement, and he comes along for the ride. He really enjoys doing outdoor stuff, so we have a great time. And then I think this is okay to add. Bill's an amateur brewer, so he brews beer,
Yeah.
and he just loves it. And I may make wine on occasion, and so we kind of support each other in our fermentation things, and yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love I think it's a good reminder of that once you even get to that retirement stage or empty nester stage, you need to still have dreams and hopes and interests and hobbies. It doesn't it doesn't ever stop. It's just
It does.
always evolving through every stage and phase of our lives and our marriages.
Mhm.
Yeah. Any last thoughts about what it's like to be a couples therapist and married or the world of marriage, how things have evolved, changed?
Okay, this was going to be a little controversial. I know that sometimes marriage just gets um, called old-fashioned, dated, that it doesn't benefit the woman. And I disagree. I think marriage is entirely who the two people are that are in it. And it can be an incredible place to grow from. It can be a source of strength and happiness. And while the marriage that Bill and I have today is not the marriage of my grandparents or my parents or any of the couples that came before them, it is very much ours.
Yeah,
And I like it.
yeah. I could see why that's controversial and it feels so true to at least how I work with couples who are either like looking at marriage or long-term commitment. There's a societal view or even like the Webster dictionary version of what marriage is. But what we get to do is we get to define it for our relationship. What does commitment mean to me and Brad, to you and Bill, to any of the couples we're working with?
Right.
And this is where we have to be really mindful as therapists. We have our own definitions. We have our own view and perspective.
Yes.
That's mine to hold. I can present it, but I'm not here to tell you that that's the way you should do it. I
Right.
will talk about how it's benefited me and supports me and is in alignment with my values. That doesn't mean you have the same values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that has changed for marriage today is that people are actually creating and cultivating marriages that really are connected to what they want that to be for themselves.
Exactly.
I think it's a great thing for people to
Mm-hmm.
be saying, like, what do we want this to mean for us? What is the intention of this?
Right.
What are the values, the legacy we want to build? It doesn't have to be what the world says.
100%. Yeah, whether it's a monogamous relationship, an ethically non-monogamous or open relationship, that is entirely up to the two people or three or four or more that are in that marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were naming it changes over time, right?
Yeah.
How we defined it for that first 10 years might be evolving or changing for the next 10.
And I can guarantee it does.
Yeah. Yeah. And how are you talking about it? Are you being mindful and bringing it to the table? This is my hope, my vision, my dreams. What are yours? I don't align, and this is sometimes why couples come to us of I've changed my perspective on this and it's creating rupture or we're wrestling with it. So
Yes.
how can you wrestle well and how can you learn and understand how that partner's gotten to that place? How does that impact your ability to stay committed? What is needed to create space for both? And that plays into that growth mindset. Is there space for both?
Mhm.
As couples therapists, we don't get to define it. We get to challenge and say, can you explore? Is it possible for you to hold? I think religion is like the common one I see in
Mhm.
our work. Someone was religious and now they're no longer religious.
Right.
Can you hold space and be partnered? Does that change your relationship? Does it not? How does it change it? What do you need from that change? And they're hard conversations to have. Or we'll just put this out here because we're in this season, politics and beliefs and
Yeah.
ethics and values.
Right.
What they were at the beginning of meeting could be the same and oftentimes change and evolve.
Yes.
Those can feel dividing, and yet they can become a connection with how you engage and explore and be curious.
Yeah.
But if you're not curious to know about it, yeah, division
So much
happens.
about that dialogue and
Yeah.
creating that safe space to be authentically you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Dionne, thanks for sharing some of your personal life with me
Thank
and
you,
with
Rachel.
those who might be watching. We have some other topics that we'll circle back to later on, but if you have topics you want us to dive into or ideas for us, feel free to put them in the comments below. And share your responses if you're a couples therapist and married, what that's like for you, or how you have seen marriages change over time. And we will see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm stopping. There we go.